What was your epiphany moment that it was time to break up with your partner? I'll go first. My ex-husband and I had been in couples therapy for many months, and at our very last appointment, the therapist looked at my husband and said, "Do you think she needs to be on more antidepressants?" And I was on Zoloft at the time, and he nodded yes. And she turned to me and said, "Maybe you need to up your dose." And that was the moment where I realized that if I need to be on more drugs to stay in this relationship, then it's not the one for me. What was your epiphany moment that it was time to break up with your partner?
He threw a cup of water in my face because my son, who was a toddler at the time, was learning how to drink water and had spilt a little bit of water on the floor. And I said, "Don't worry, it's just water." And he goes, "It's just water?" Well, if it's just water, unscrews the shaker cup, throws it in my face. Now, I had stayed through a lot with him, moved 2 provinces. We were going to couples therapy. He was going to his own individual therapist, and I was going to my own individual therapist. And when I started telling her what was going on in my relationship, she said, "You need a line in the sand. You need to come up with something that is your breaking point." And for me, it was anything physical. I set the bar so high, or I guess so low, I never thought it would be reached. I truly never thought. But the second that water hit my face in front of my 2-year-old, I've never been more embarrassed and ashamed. And I just looked at him and I was like, that's it. That's the end of our relationship. I moved out a month later because he wouldn't.
What was your epiphany moment that it was time to break up with your partner?
Let me tell you about the time I walked a middle-aged woman through my house in search of her phone and discovered that my fiance was cheating on me. This will have to be more than one part. Anyway, the story starts with me being a dumb bitch. I was in this long-term toxic relationship. I wanted it to be committed and exclusive, and they wanted it to appear committed and exclusive while still sleeping around. I did discover that I was being cheated on with random people almost every day. But during the relationship, I would only uncover this infidelity like once every 4 months. We lived in this gorgeous, renovated, historic townhome in a super up-and-coming neighborhood. My partner worked at a bar in this neighborhood within walking distance, so I would go to this bar a lot. One night I'm sitting at the bar with my friends, and my fiance who's working says, "Hey, this woman's on her way. I gave her a tour of our house while you were at work, and she thinks she set her phone down somewhere." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, sounds totally normal." And I'll explain why in part 2.
What was your epiphany moment that it was time to break up with your partner?
What up, part 2? This was around the time that I started my business, so networking was super important for me. Hanging out at these bars and restaurants, I would run into and meet important people in my city. I live in a small city. People who would give me advice and then become my friend and come over to my house for a nightcap or some wine. And I always loved going for tours of these houses. My house in particular had so much exposed brick that had decades old graffiti and etchings. There was a giant American flag painted in the basement. People like to walk through the house and just kind of see stuff. Which is funny because when I look back at the way that I decorated, yikes. But I was broken trying to fit in. So while at first I thought it was weird that my fiance was the one that initiated this, the explanation was like, she was at the bar and she was interested in getting one of the townhomes next to us and just asked. So this woman arrives, she's maybe 50. So obviously the story is legit. I walk her over to my house, I unlock it, and we start looking for her phone. I'm like going through couch cushions, turning stuff over for her. I'm like, do you have an idea of where you were? And she says, all over the place.
What was your epiphany moment that it was time to break up with your partner?
Part 3. So we are now 40 minutes into searching. I should say I was, because she really wasn't doing anything. She would just walk into each room and just kind of look left and right. Meanwhile, I was like turning stuff over. Like, I've been in this situation before. I've lost my phone places. I know exactly everywhere to look. So eventually I call it. I'm like, I can't find it. I will keep an eye out. I promise. I'll look more tomorrow. I just felt terrible. And looking back, I'm sure she felt terrible for reasons we will discuss soon. So she leaves. I lock the house. I leave. But as I'm walking back to the bar, I notice that she is in her car with her phone in her hand. So I'm like, this is weird. Get back to the bar, tell my fiance she couldn't find it. So I resume my night with my friends. Meanwhile, my fiance is just glued to their phone, typing furiously, clearly very distracted by what they're typing. Later that night, I'm thinking about how bad I feel for this woman. Can't stop thinking about how weird it was that she had a phone. Realized that I never actually lifted the couch. So I lift the couch and there it is. And what did I find?
What was your epiphany moment that it was time to break up with your partner?
Part 4, I've found the phone. I press the lock screen comes on, and I see a trail of messages from my fiance. This wouldn't be weird because I'm assuming this woman got on Facebook on a computer and was communicating with my fiance that way. The content of the messages, and granted I could only see my fiance's side because this was the other person's lock screen, was the process of arranging for this woman to come. So this phone does not belong to this woman. this phone belongs to someone else. Someone else was in my house. Come to find out, this was a random hookup. I bet you can guess which app that left their phone at my house during the hookup. And this person and my fiance proceeded to craft this wild situation where a woman who I still don't even know how she was related to the whole situation, some random 50-year-old woman would come to save the day, but it didn't work out. And I should be nicer because I don't know how much she knew or what she knew, but like, what the hell? The worst part is I still didn't leave after that.
What was your epiphany moment that it was time to break up with your partner?
Final part. So unfortunately, just up and leaving was not something I could do at the moment because of finances. But I did know that there was nothing that was ever going to change about this person. I had put in too much work, and all of the work that they were putting in was in deceiving me. I immediately stopped prioritizing my love life, but to avoid getting trapped in getting sucked in or sweet talked back in, I just set an event on my calendar for 1 year from that night. It said something along the lines of, if you're not out now, get out. After that, I just used the rest of the time to cry. And it did not take a year. It took maybe a couple of months to fully get all the way out. But when that event finally came, the full year mark, I was dating the person who would become my husband. So yeah, for some of us, the epiphanies come really late. But to quote the show BoJack Horseman, when you look at someone with rose-colored glasses, all the red flags just look like flags. So be gentle to your friends who are in toxic relationships.
What was your epiphany moment that it was time to break up with your partner?
Well, it surely wasn't when he'd get jealous because I'd be scheduled to work with male coworkers, not having any control over my work schedule. Or after that, when I worked at a daycare and he'd get jealous when I'd come home and talk about my toddlers. Yeah, my class full of 1-year-olds. He didn't like me talking about them. He'd get really jealous because there was boys in my class. Yeah, that wasn't it. Wasn't it when I broke my toe and he refused to let me rest because he didn't believe it was broken, or the time that I got a severe sinus infection and developed pleurisy. I couldn't cough around him because that was disturbing. Wasn't when he stopped having sex with me, or the time that he yelled at me for wanting to give him a blowjob. No, it took a stranger who was having difficulties in their own relationship to turn to me and say, do you ever get to the point where you realize you're no longer in love with the person you're in a relationship with? Rather, you're in love with the effort that you put into being in a relationship with that person. Yes.
What was your epiphany moment that it was time to break up with your partner?
You would think that it was the years of constant cheating, but it was not. It wasn't the multiple times that he sent me pictures and videos of himself cheating. It wasn't the constant name calling and degrading, whether it's the way I'm dressed or the way that I'm talking that day. It still wasn't all the nights that I was forced to sleep on the floor with our child. My day came on August 6, 2017. It was just another day that I caught him cheating. Something about this day felt different though. It felt like the last time. And he felt that too. He knew I was leaving. Long story short, I tried to pack up my stuff and leave the house as quickly as I could with our son. Half my items were already broken at this point, but I just wanted out. On my way out with my very last item, he barricaded the door. I had our son in my arms. He shoved us backwards. He scratched me. He pulled my hair. He punched me. Every time that I fell to the ground with my son in my arms, I knew in that moment, if I didn't get out for good, I would be dead or my son would be dead. After several attempts, I did get out, and I never went back.
What was your epiphany moment that it was time to break up with your partner?
I had told my wife that I was unhappy and that I'd been going to counseling and going to a therapist during the day because I was depressed and did not know if I wanted to be married. She told me that she was extremely happy and couldn't understand how I could be depressed or unhappy in any way. I told her I thought that we should go to couples counseling, and she said she didn't want to and she needed a break, so she went and took a shower and thought. And when she came back, she said that she wanted us to stay married. It was very important to her. She was very happy, and she couldn't imagine why I wasn't happy, but if I wanted to keep going to therapy, I should. And in the meantime, here's a list of all of the things that are wrong with me that I should talk to my therapist about. And that was when I knew that it was over. And this is bacon.
What was your epiphany moment that it was time to break up with your partner?
Mine was when I had my daughter and she was 8 weeks old, and it was about 7 a.m. and we were sleeping, and she was a cluster feeder, so I was up all night feeding her, and he wanted to work out in my bedroom. I had a 4-bedroom house that I paid for. There were so many places to work out, so I asked, hey, can you work out in a different room and not blare music in here while me and the baby are sleeping? And he said, no, why don't you just move to the couch? And I said, that's weird. And he threw a whole fit, threw my fan across the room, started calling me all these names, and said if maybe I got my lazy fat whale ass up, I wouldn't look the way I do. And then told me to shut the fuck up. And so then I did shut the fuck up, and then he yelled at me for shutting the fuck up, and then he came over and punched me in the face and started choking me and then ripped my baby from my arms. And that was, yeah, that was the epiphany moment. I had to decide, if I don't leave, either myself or my daughter will be dead. So I left.
What was your epiphany moment that it was time to break up with your partner?
I had a weekly therapy appointment every Wednesday from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. One Wednesday, I was on my way to my therapy appointment when my therapist called and said she had an emergency and she needed to cancel my appointment. So instead of going to therapy, I went through a drive-thru, I got some food, I pulled into a park, and I ate, and then I went home. I was home at the exact same time that I usually was. There was literally nothing different, and he flew down the stairs in rage. He pinned me against the wall outside, and then he threatened to slit the throats of me, my 2 daughters, and our newborn son, because I hadn't gone to therapy. And if I hadn't gone to therapy that day, then I clearly wasn't going any other day, which had to mean I was cheating on him. I showed him where my therapist had called me, and 10 minutes later, I had gotten the food, and I had the receipt. I pulled up the GPS tracker to show the history of where I went. He didn't believe any of it. I was tired of hearing him scream at me, so I went inside and I started making dinner for the kids. When dinner was done, I went upstairs to my room. We had separate bedrooms, and I started packing. He came in, asked what I was doing, and told him I was packing, that I was leaving. He laughed, made jokes, did the, "Oh yeah, sure, you're leaving, okay." And then it was the, "Nobody's gonna love you like I do." Finally, at 4 o'clock the next day, when I was all packed and ready to go, as a final try to stop me from leaving, he held a gun to my dog's head and told me he was gonna shoot him. I loved that dog, and he knew it. And I said, "Well, if that's what you're gonna do, that's what you're gonna do, but I'm still leaving." He then turned the gun to my daughter and said, "I'll kill everybody here." The neighbor heard that one and called 911. The cops came. They kept him in the house and me outside the house while my friend came and picked me up. My friend drove me to the airport. I got on a plane. I landed in Missouri, walked to the airport, hugged my brother, and threw up. I spent 7 years with him. This is the morning the day before I left him, 3 days after I left him, 30 days after I left him. If I hadn't left him that day, I would have died. There's no question in my mind. He was so fierce and so convinced that I cheated on him, which I never did. He would have killed me. He would have killed the kids. But he wouldn't have killed himself. He would have played his favorite role, the victim.
What was your epiphany moment that it was time to break up with your partner?
Pretty serious relationship with somebody. We were living together, but we were in counseling because it was kind of like on the rocks, but I still was like, I can make this work. And then there was this one moment, done. So we were asleep in bed. I wake up because the bed is shaking. It's not what you think. I look over and they are scrubbing the bed. I'm like, what's going on? They were like, I don't want to talk about it. I keep asking them. And then finally they're like, fine, I shit the bed. Of course I was like, are you sick? Let me help, blah, blah, blah. But that wasn't the, tell me that they were dreaming that they were pooping, but then they wake up because their legs were spreading. I laugh, but I also was like, this is a funny situation we can handle. They were like, I can't believe you're laughing. You should stop laughing. Shame. And it was done. Here's the logic. There are 2 types of people in this world. If you shit in the bed they're sleeping in, one type is going to judge you, be disgusted, and be mad. And the other type are going to laugh and help you clean it up. If you have the laugher and you don't see it as a gift, you don't deserve that. Know your worth.